So, like I said, this is one we've been waiting on for a while. We've talked about it, and like a lot of things I talk about, they just kind of float into the ether. And you know, we forced ourselves this week to jump on. This is a person that I've had the honor and privilege to be a part of their journey, and vice versa. This is probably the person that I speak to the most, more than family, more than friends. We've had, chats until 5 in the morning sometimes talking about, student success and principles and books and ideas and challenges. Um, it's been an absolute honor, and probably the person that challenges me the most to become better each day, especially after I started getting feedback from students that they loved his calls the most. Made me a little bit jealous, but you know, he takes the ego, and it's all part of the game. So this is, as most of you know, Hunter Ailes. He is our head coach at UCM. He was student number 7 in the original case study. We've been together for going on 17 months now. And yeah, this is it, and welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here. It's been an awesome journey. It's been really fun, and getting to know you has been amazing. So really glad to have you in my life, and it's amazing also to see, like, just like what you said, like we have these long discussions, and I think what's always been interesting to me is we've had different paths that we've gone in our life, and come from different backgrounds. And I think what's been amazing for me to see is how much we agree and relate on, even though we've gone different ways. Because I think sometimes people go in life and they'll have totally different views and ideas, and so I think that's been a beautiful thing, and it's been an amazing ride. It's been really fun.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, there's definitely a connection there, in that different belief system, different ideas, different ways to go about going about things. But I think that what's always connected us is the core values, right? The integrity, the transparency, and one thing you've helped me with is the simplicity, right? It's like sometimes you want to take an idea that you feel is so strong, and develop it, make it big. And what I've realized from you is like MVP, right? What is the minimum viable steps that get you to that destination? And so let's go all the way back down memory lane. How did you stumble upon this crazy world of high ticket sales?
Yeah, so I got my start like 6 years ago. I was around 20, almost 21, and my first opportunity was working with a real estate company. There was a gentleman I knew, and he was someone I looked up to growing up, and he's like, "Hey, I have this opportunity. It's kind of short term, and before I was moving on to some other things." And so I got introduced to sales, and hopping on the phones, and talking with people, and like I said, in this real estate company. And since then I've gone through a lot of different industries and situation. There's kind of seeing where it took me. So 6 years ago, that's how I got into it. Was, I mean, serendipitously. They're just like, "Hey, here's an opening, here's an opportunity." And I was like, they're like, "We think you're nice." And I was like, "Okay." And I took it, and then kind of fell in love with the idea, and with being paid for my work and my results, and not for my time. And I thought that was an amazing thing, because I saw that early on. Like, a lot of people were working paycheck to paycheck. They were clocking in, clocking out, and I was like, that's kind of lame. And I felt like there was a lot of great employees that worked hard and went the extra mile, and there was those that did not, and they got paid the same. And that really bugged me. So sales was a great leeway into that, and went into then selling tech and credit repair and options, CBD. I did a short stint with like a health program through smoothies, uh, growing wedding photography businesses, just a bunch of different companies and industries. And finally, that's how, I mean, we even met up. Was I started trying to network on the online space. I'd always networked outside of that, like with people that were around me, and I was like, wow, I mean, networking is something you could do online, and that's originally how we connected.
Yeah.
year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. So, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool. So that was kind of like my journey in and finding a little bit out about it. And especially around COVID, like I said, I was working sales, in these specific locations. And I was like, I wonder, like, is it possible I could just work from anywhere? And I started researching and investigating that. And I was like, turns out you can,
So you can. It's actually a billion dollar.
then started getting some ads about this high ticket sales space. And I was like, high ticket. I was like, what does that even mean? What's a closer? What are some of those words which seem to be new to me? I always just tell people I'm a sales rep, sales professional, whatever. Yeah. Closer was an interesting idea.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, from day one, that was something we related on, was the power of networking. When we shared stories, it's, going back of how we got different jobs, it always seemed to come back to a person, a relationship. Early on, I always called it luck, right? Like, looking back, I always refer to referrals and networking as luck, right? It's like, oh, just the right person, the right time. And then when something happens so consistently, it's hard to call it luck, right? Because I understood it, and you always hear it from, like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think it's obviously a combination of both. And then I looked at, successful people, they always seem to kind of work. And then you hear these, like, government networking things to get things done. You hear the behind the scenes of the most powerful people meeting together and leveraging. And then the big hit for me was the word strategic alliance. That clicked. And I'm like, well, both of those things, I've seen Survivor. I know that you need alliances, Big Brother, right? It's like, you can't win that show without those. Yeah. And that clicked for me. I'm like, okay, those are important. And I love strategy. As you know, that's for me, I'm a strategy geek. That's where I focus. Skill development is always important, but, like, I've seen the most exponential growth from adjusting strategy more than skill. And I know that's very controversial these days, but that's just my own personal experience. Yeah. But what was it for you that clicked with networking that said, I'm going to allocate a certain amount of resources, or this is an avenue that I want to pursue?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So for me, up until my life, like, especially when I initially got into sales, right, my networking was very coincidental, right? Just like you said, it was by luck. It was almost serendipity, right? It was like, wow, what are the chances? It's very coincidental. And networking didn't become calculated for me until I was trying to apply to some better sales jobs and opportunities. And I sent out, like, within a couple of days, I sent out like 500 applications, resumes, all of this stuff, and just heard nothing back. And I was like, wow, this is depressing. That really takes a blow on, like, the ego and how valuable you are, and all of that. And so I kind of thought about it and was like, you know what, my resume is not the best. I mean, it's not like that amazing, but I've done good things. I've been a good person, but I think on paper, I just don't look very good. And so from that moment, I realized, I was like, well, what if they got to know me as a person instead of knowing me as a piece of paper, which is like a resume application? And so from that point on, and that was 5 years ago, because I had that first initial sales job, and I was like, oh, let me have a little bit of sales experience. Like, what if I started getting to some better ones, And then that's where it really became calculated. And I started spending time building relationships with the companies and areas that I wanted to get into, having them to get to know me as a person instead of just me as a piece of paper. And that's, ever since then, I started allocating basically all my resources. I've gone all in. I am, never, like I said, the job post idea, like I don't spend my time doing that. I know some people do, and I think it's okay to spend some time on that. But that's when I started going all in, and then I started researching the study and the statistics and the evidence that's been done on people going through job posts. And then I'm like, oh, I made the best decision of just going all in on networking and building relationships. So that's what flipped for me, and I was like, oh, I can be calculated and get where I want to go instead of it happening by happenstance or coincidence.
Yeah. I think, I caught the tail end of that transition. I think before that, you were obviously way bought in, but there was a moment that I seen you just shift, and it was like it went to a whole different level of like I said, we both connected and understood that this is the game and this is the VIP instead of the outside lineup. But there was something that changed in you that you just became obsessive and just dove in and really started to develop. And then it wasn't, 2 or 3 weeks later where you had lesson upon lesson and it was almost like, and I hate to say overnight because everything is developed over time, but you started to be seen from an outside perspective as an expert in networking and the go-to person and delivering the coach, not just an example or an influential member of UCM, but the go-to source for networking and landing, six-figure opportunities and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So was that was that due to those kind of figuring out the numbers, what's happening in the job application line, or was it something else?
Yeah, great question. So I think those were like the seedlings. But really what did it for me last summer, I was going on a youth camping trip where we take some of the youth in my church organization to go. We went to Moab and did some amazing whitewater rafting and stuff like that. It was really fun. And it was a blast. During that time, one of the other leaders who I'd known before, but we got to talk a little bit more deeply and to get to know each other. He was a master. He had a master's in chemical engineering and had applied and been accepted to his PhD program to pursue chemical engineering further. And we were talking about work and school and all that. And he's like, yeah, I currently work at like Dashmart, which for people that don't know that, like DoorDash has like a little mini supermarket mart in which you can buy items like energy drinks, like if you like, they'd run to the grocery store for you basically. And that was like heartbreaking. And I was like, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Like what has it been like to work there? And what blew me away is that this person who was heavily qualified, very educated, an amazing person, employee, all the values, like full of integrity, like we'll go the extra mile, we'll think about others, all of these things. And he's working at Dashmart. And that like made me super angry. How is that possible? How is it possible that someone this great that I've been able to get to know, like, would be working at a place like that? And as I started to look out more and more, and especially amongst the sales space, is there's a lot of amazing and persuasive and exceptional sales reps that are out there, and they're making $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month, simply because the right people don't know them.
Yeah.
And that was the case with my friend Jansen. And that it really made me mad. And so I became, right, one of my motivators is like spite. Right. And like, this is ridiculous. Right. And so then I really took a deep dive and I consume lots of information really quickly and can get really deep into it. And so that's when everything started spring. But it was really for him that started that. And then looking at a lot of individuals I knew that were in the same place for the same reason. Not because they're not great, not because they're not exceptional, simply because the right people haven't seen them yet. And so ever since then, I've been on a mission just to be able to fix that. Been going in the high-ticket sales space, but I hope to help college students ultimately, like long-term goals I'd like to expand out of.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. Yeah, that's that. I remember having the conversation. We both had kind of similar stats and had found similar research about, the softwares around job applications and what small percentage actually gets seen and all these things, which I thought was it is disheartening. And I've seen a lot of capable salespeople as well that, aren't making any money. And I've seen a lot of average salespeople that are making good cash. And
and even to just cut you off, JD, like something else that blows my mind, and this is another frustrating part, is because then people think that's a reflection of how good they are, which is so ridiculous that because of, where you're at, it's like, oh, I must be a bad sales rep, or this must not be the industry for me, or which are all things like, and I'm sure there's case for that, but I would think generally it's just not true. It's simply because the right people haven't gotten to know you and see you and move forward with that. And that's another thing that's heartbreaking as well, is like, yeah, maybe I'm just not valued, right? Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, right? And I think there's elements of that, but I think generally, like I said, people are amazing stellar. It's like they just need that right opportunity to really shine and show forth.
Yeah, I've seen a similar thing. And so, when I first started this, the word networking was non-existent, right? It's like, if you did the analytics in the high ticket sales space, it just wasn't a word that people were using.
Well, and even now, if people type in networking, just the word networking into Google, 7 out of your 10 results are going to be computer science, right?
Exactly.
So like, it's still even behind on like,
100%.
what its attention is on.
100%. And it raises an interesting point because, through looking at my career, and I would say I've always said that networking has had the best ROI out of any strategy or any action or any allocation of resources that I've ever had. And I've talked till I'm blue in the face about it to really get that message out. Now, from an outside perspective, we start seeing people talking about it. They're saying they're doing it. But then what I've found from my personal experience is, to them, networking means reaching out and sending an intro video, or reaching out and saying, hey, are you hiring? Or, hey, I'm a high ticket closer and I do da 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 da. So to me, that's an element, right? That's more of the cold outreach, which is an element of networking. But can you give us a broad sense of what other areas are included in networking, or how does that break up? Like, what is networking as a whole?
Yeah, great question. I think everyone has different definitions. And I think what's an important part to come into is like, what is it actually? And that's a big thing that I've been researching, studying on, and working through. And so, because I think a lot of people say like, oh, it's just building relationships. That's an aspect of networking, but I wouldn't say that's networking, right? Or it's like, oh, it's sending messages to people. And that's, I think, part of the groundwork, right, of doing it. But I don't think that's what networking is. And so the definition I've come to, and I think it'll still maybe evolve and become, I want to get it like perfect, like what's like the correct word, for this. And what I think networking is it's the cultivation of reciprocal relationships for personal and professional development. That's the definition I've come to as I've just researched and taken all these ideas. And that's what it is. And so I think people will they'll miss aspects of it. They'll miss aspects of the cultivation part, right? So what they'll do is they'll send an outreach video and they won't hear back. And then they're like, okay. So then they're not trying to cultivate anymore, right? It's like they tried to plant the seed, that looked at it, it didn't grow instantaneously. And they're like, must not be it, instead of cultivating that. I think another aspect that's huge of networking that people miss on is the reciprocal part, that it's a give back and forth, right? And so oftentimes, the big mindset is when people go into networking, they think about what's in it for me. Mm-hmm. And what people need to realize is that when you think about just what's in it for me, you're going to have to fight longer and harder to actually get what's in it for you. But if you just switch that and said, hey, what's in it for this person? What can I give them that they want, right? And I know that if people give other individuals what they want, you will always, you won't have to fight very hard for it, get what you want, right? And that's where, and I'm trying to remember who the quote is from, and I quote it all the time, which is really powerful. And what they say is that the most selfish thing that you can do is to give unselfishly, because it always comes back. This idea of like, because you scratch my back, I'm going to scratch yours, right? It's the law of reciprocity. And so I think those are two really major mindsets that people struggle with. The cultivation, which is going to require, consistent effort, patience, perseverance, right? And reciprocal in the sense of, we can't be desperate. We have to give willingly, abundantly, all of those aspects, right? So that then it comes back. And so most people, I think, especially when they're around a job, it's like, I need a job. And so they're in a desperation state, and it's really hard for them to give, right? It's kind of the idea. It's like, It's like, imagine telling a homeless person that they need to donate their money to charity, right? It's
Mm.
like they're in such a desperate place, like everything has to come back to them. And so
Yeah.
you have to really fight to get into a place of, and I think abundance, I'm going to use that loosely. I'm not saying you have to
Yeah.
have this massive amount of wealth, but you have to be in a place that you are willing and able to give
Mhm.
consistently, not worry about like, is it going to come back?
Yeah.
It's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's funny because, the irony is we have someone named Hunter telling us we need to cultivate and grow. I always like that. But that to me is
I should have been a recruiter, a headhunter,
yeah.
teaching networking. So
Yeah. But I think most people gravitate towards this industry because they don't like their 9 to 5. That's a big, not everybody, but that's a big portion, right? There's some opportunistic people, but most people are reactive to negative, and I want to move away from that. But what I've seen is they bring that 9 to 5 mentality. Okay, I need a certificate. I need to apply for jobs. I need to do everything that I'm doing here. So really, what I've seen create is a 9 to 5 remote industry. That's where it seems to be there's a percentage of people that are gravitating to, I hate my 9 to 5, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but it's going to be on Zoom. Right. And I think a lot of that has to do with the transactional mindset that you're talking about and this idea of I'm on the job hunt. Right. Because what I see is a bunch of people tunnel vision, like, get out of my way. I'm looking for a job. And the person they push out of the way has a relationship with their dream client. Right. And I have so many people that, like, hey, do you have a job? No, I don't have a job for you. Sorry. Okay. Next. Right. And I'm like, I do have a network of, 10,000 people that I've built relationships with over 7 years that have jobs. I have people, but like there is the idea that there is no job hunt. There's people with problems. And I love that you use the word cultivate and grow, because that transaction, that one for one, I want one action to deliver one result, is what keeps people stuck. That is right. Like, you work 1 hour for your employer in the 9 to 5, they pay you $25 per hour. It's one for one. But business owners and investors and successful people and athletes and kind of high achievers understand, to really get the exponential growth, you have to give up the ability to, or the desire to be one for one. And so, like, can you just kind of expand on this idea of how does networking work as far as an investment, or like, is it something that you're going to see results right off? Because some people think, well, that's a long-term strategy. Some people think it's the only strategy for short term. But where do you start seeing, if it's not transactional, how do you see the results?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people, some misconceptions as well, is I think that like networking, like I said, obviously it's a long term, like you said, there's results and they can grow over time, but they do have short term, benefits and opportunities there. That is that's going with that. And so, right, how does that like compound, right? When does it really hit stride and starting it? And so most people, especially like I said, where networking is difficult, is that they'll have a network in their own little realm, like their families, their friends that are in a certain industry or idea. And so starting that in a new place, they're like, oh, I'm totally new. And so then what do they go to the revert to? And is there just like job posts, right? These ideas. And they'll kind of start working towards that, right? And start putting like, oh, someone says help wanted. Great, I'll throw my name in the hat and see if I can help there, right? And so where the networking really starts getting that exponential result is when you really start helping people and getting them what they want, and then doors start opening. Because I think what people need to realize, especially this one-on-one transaction, is it's not correct in networking. And the reason why that is because when you're helping one person and you're connecting and serving them, that doesn't just allow you access to just them, but they could have 10, 20, 30, 40 people that's behind them that you don't know about and you can't see, right? Like you said, JD, like, hey, I built relationships and connections with, 10,000 people that are behind me, right? And so if they just built a relationship and connection with you, right, that allows potential access and opportunity to the people behind you, right? So when we think transactional, or I think oftentimes people think about networking linearly, right? Like I build a relationship with one person, right? Or they think it's long-term because they're like, oh, wow, like JD had to build relationships with 10,000 individual people. No, it could be, right? And I don't know, JD built a relationship with 50 to 150 people, but that has allowed him to have access to 10,000 people, right? And so people need to think and realize and understand how far that influence and connection go. It's not just one-on-one transaction between that one person, but it extends out to who is behind them and around them that you can't necessarily know and see, but that you would know if you actually went about cultivating that relationship.
100%. Yeah. It's exactly that. I think it started with probably 25 people. And then I really noticed that they started expanding into like kind of friends of friends. And so, I've really only cultivated, I would say, 500 relationships over 7 years, which is not that much. Right. But that has allowed me to make those connections. And there's certain people, it's kind of like buying a stock. There's certain stocks it hits. And it's like, I thought I was just doing something nice for someone. Turns out there's 3,000 people that trust them and love them. And now I just tap into that. It's like a gold mine.
Right.
But I think people struggle with the idea of compounding interest and the idea of exponential growth.
Right.
And so I always compare it to investing because that's something that people can kind of relate to, in that you wouldn't look at an investment account with $10 million in it and be like, oh, that person invested $10 million. Right? Like, okay, 40 years later, he's got 10 million. He must have invested 10 million. He might have invested $1,000 and then $100 every 2 weeks. Right? But it's the same with networking. When you look at a network, it's not, I've built individual relationships with all of those people. It started to just take off. And I found about 3 to 4 months of really strong relationship building, giving without expectation, adding value and having that visibility as much as possible. And it just started to snowball. Now, I don't want to only talk about networking, but it is such an important aspect and it's not talked about. Let's zoom out a little bit. I mean, you've seen a lot of success. You've seen a lot of people struggle. You've seen a lot of people drop off, like you said, and base it on like, oh, sales is not for me, or I'm not good at sales because I haven't got a result. So as someone who is as fascinated in principles and trends and data as I am, is there anything that you've seen across the board as far as what it takes to be successful, or it could be on the other side? Like if you don't have these things, you're bound to fail.
Yeah, great question. I think so. Like I said, I really love principles. Like, what's a singular idea that I can gravitate to and then work on that is going to help a lot of things, right? Like, that's why I kind of like, as an idea of what that is, like if I just had a good diet and exercise, I would have a lot of huge health benefits. Like it would help my sleep. It would help my heart. Like it would help my mood. Like it feels so many things just doing one or two things, right?
Yeah.
So for me is what it comes down to of like, what are like the bottlenecks to success? I think it only comes down to three things. I think everything falls into one of these three things. And those are beliefs, characteristics, skills. I think those are the only three things. And what'll happen is that you may be in a certain stage of life or in your career, especially in sales, where up until this point, the current beliefs, characteristics, and skills you have gotten to this point. And when you want to get to that next level, you're going to have to go back and reevaluate. Now, what new beliefs, do I need to be able to have? What new characteristics do I need to develop? And what new skill sets, right, do I need to hone more fully, right? Because what got you here may not get you there. And I think that's hard for people to understand, because what they'll do is they'll keep beating it down and just saying like, I've been successful because of these things. I'm going to stick to it. But we really need to be reflective and saying, okay, are the beliefs that have got me here are going to help me get to the next level? And if you say no, then we need to change or adapt those beliefs. And we can use beliefs in lots of different ways, right? I like beliefs because it's an idea, or it's something that you can choose to gravitate to. We can call it mindset. We can call it, there's a couple of different things we can call it. But yeah, I think beliefs, characteristics, skill sets have been the hard thing. So I think for a lot of people, what will happen is they'll have the beliefs and the skills, right? But maybe not the characteristics that can take them to the next level. So like for networking, a lot of people may have the skills of it, but because they don't have the right beliefs around networking, like we've talked about how it's a compounding interest, right? Or the right characteristics of being generous, right? That doesn't matter what skills you have, right? You're going to be limited on that, right? On those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important because, the industry gravitates towards skill development. And I understand that because it's a bit of imposter syndrome. It's a little bit of insecurity. I had it. I think anytime you start something new, when your confidence is low, you gravitate towards skill, right? The better I am at this, the better I'll be. But like anything else, like fitness or health, there's plateaus, right? And so what I've seen is people invest every dollar, every waking hour on skill development, getting better and better and better. And because it's external, it's not as, there's not as much deep work. There's not as much kind of mess involved, and I think that people don't have a guide or not enough role models and people that they look up to are talking about developing character and developing beliefs. Right? Beliefs a little bit more, that's especially in the last few years, but everyone gravitates towards that skill development and more of a general skill development. And what I've found is more of an individual. So they're developing the skill around a certain thing. So like, okay, I'm going to develop objection handling skills or building rapport or asking questions or like the section of a sales call that they feel most insecure about, they're more likely to go in that direction. Now, as far as identifying which area and prioritizing, like how do you identify what skills that you need to improve on? And yeah, I'll just start there, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I break these principles down into different questions so that I can then self-evaluate. So I may have this principal idea, but then I need to be able to ask a question that's able to help me evaluate that. So for example, around beliefs, it's like, am I believing the right things, right? Or how do my beliefs impact what I'm doing, right? So for example, like I grew up very poor. My parents said, debt is bad. Don't invest any sort of money, right? Like, you need to save it for a rainy day, all these different ideas, right? So then when I got kind of interested in the idea of like investing, I was like, I need to find the safest, investments, or I need to, right? And I think I'm just giving you guys an idea here, but like, I need to find like, what is it exactly that I need to do that? But I realized that some of my beliefs were restricting me back from an opportunity that was going to give me more potential, right? And ideas, right? There for moving forward. So yeah, that would be around my beliefs. Like, are my beliefs serving me in this case? How are they helping me? And I have to identify which ones, right? Which beliefs am I exercising here? Are they serving me? If it's a no, okay, then what belief do I need to adopt or develop, right? Buy into, that is going to help me. Same thing with characteristics, right? What characteristics are needed to accomplish this? Do I have those characteristics? Do I see them at work in my own life? So I think one, like a huge characteristic that people really struggle with in sales is resilience, overcoming rejection, right? Or we hear a lot of burnout, right? You see that with people that have outbound, right? Ideas and principles, and they're like, I'm just burned out, right? And so what they're lacking is grit, maybe vision, right? Some of these characteristics that are going to help them move forward and proceed. And so then I say, what characteristics do I need to adopt? Same thing with skills, right? Are my current skills helping me? What skills do I need to improve? Where am I lacking, right? And so I think an important thing to realize also at the highest level, like I said, as a counter argument to skills, like I said, skills are obviously important and you need to be working and constantly honing your skills. I think what's interesting is like, I look at sports, right? And you see a wide array in skill ability in like, let's say basketball, right? Basketball, this in soccer, all this. how come there's such a crazy discrepancy between someone at the bottom of a sports team or industry like the NBA and versus someone at the top that is like they're the greatest, they're at the top of the league. Are they not all working on skills? I'd be shocked if most of them are going to practice working out, developing their skills, right, and ideas. And I think what it comes down to is some of those big discrepancies, those things, and you see Kobe, Michael Jordan, their characteristics and beliefs were so far ahead, and LeBron James, another great example of everyone else, their beliefs, their mentalities, right? Mamba mentality, right? About, and we think that is the determining factor of Kobe, and that pushed him and his ability to develop skills more fully than if he just worked on skills alone. And so it's like a secular, like a.
That's it. Yeah, and I mean that's a great example because again, another area of high achievement, right? And we see something very similar here. It seems most people go through there's not 45 different options when it comes to sales training in this industry. Most people go through one of three, and most people have some sort of sales training, but the success rate, like it's all over the place, right? The earning potentials are all over the place. The people who, can't find jobs, the people who make tons of money, the people who make no money. So it shows that there's other factors involved when it comes to success. And again, I think you have the same idea of like, is skill development important? Absolutely. Is it the only importance? Absolutely not. Right? If you're not reliable, if you're not resilient, if you don't have empathy or understanding of human beings, or all of these areas are really important. And so, back to when you transitioned into this industry, did you invest in sales training right off the bat?
No, not off the bat. Because once again, I got into this industry coincidentally, and so then I started, like I said, working and developing that. Now I didn't spend any money on sales training, but. And I also took a different approach, and we can argue if this is wrong or not, but I have a little bit of a different ways it comes to problem solving. But I was constantly said when I was working in like one of my very first sales jobs, like I said, I worked as a closer, right? The word that people use, right? I worked as an inbound sales representative, which means my calendar was getting booked and I was taking calls and I was closing deals. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, like you need to be outbound, you need to do outbound to be able to. I just didn't do that. And so a lot of people are like, oh, you have to be a setter before you are a closer, which is interesting. Anyways, it's possible, guys. Just know that there's opportunities out there. And so I recognize there is some development and that I don't have any problems with that, but it is possible. Anyways, but what I did was like, when people said, hey, you need to find out people's pains and problems, I didn't start looking up sales related stuff. I was looking up the process of like what doctors and like what they did in their process, because they were finding and figuring out people's pain and problems. And so I was like, yeah, what do doctors do? What are some of the questions asked? How do they ask them? Right? Because what's interesting is that you walk in and, you have the nurse, right? That'll help you. Then you have the doctor come in and immediately you're like, man, this person has authority, right? And then they ask very simple, questions that help get down the road. And so I started studying that. And and then another thing that people said is like, no, you have to get people to have to say this of their own volition, right? You can't just be like, you can't assume these things, right? You need to have them say it so that you know it. And so then what I did is like, once I didn't go to sales, I went to lawyers. Like, because their whole idea is when they're cross-examining is to ask certain questions in a way that has people admit and share out of their own mouth what they're thinking, feeling, what's the evidence, so that I don't go off of any assumption. So I went around and navigated that. And then when I was like 5 or 6 years in, I had relatively good success. Like I said, on my own, I was doing 15, 20 grand a month, consistently with some books of business that I've done. But like, I did it all on the basis I didn't like invest in sales training, because I was listening to stuff and I found some videos on YouTube from, I think, Dan Locke and Grant Cardone. And I was like, it doesn't feel right. Like it kind of grinded. Like there was like a lot of friction there. I was like, I don't know, and so it was nice to be able to see that, because I had my experience of like what was working, and I even tried some of their stuff, right? And maybe I didn't do it right, but I felt like it triggered things in the person that it just seemed like they trusted me less when I took that approach.
Yeah.
But then I
Yeah.
invested in some sales training later down the road.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience, and I know that it creates a lot of controversy when you say this because it's anecdotal, and that like we've had our experience, other people had their experience, and they couldn't imagine not investing in sales training. And I think the biggest message, right, is challenge that there is one way to do anything, especially when it comes to success in an industry, because we see it all the time. Oh, you can't say price at the beginning, and then you see someone saying price at the beginning, making 80% close rate. Oh, you can't do this. Oh, you shouldn't focus on that. Like,
for yes, never get them to say no, because at the end of the call, you want them to say yes when you say,
yeah,
"Would you buy my said thing?"
exactly. And so my view was never to say my way is right. I want to express that there is many different routes to success, and to say that someone who couldn't afford sales training can't be successful in this industry, to me is not right. Someone
Well,
to say it is mandatory from day one to invest in sales training is a bit ludicrous in my mind, but it's worked for people, and so that's great. But you have to be able to question. And
yeah.
I took a similar path in saying, what is the breakdown here? So I actually learned a lot of my sales training, one from psychology, psychology nerd, as you know, the other public speaking, because I'm like, if you can sell a crowd of 5,000 people on an idea without ever talking to them or move them, that is influence. And I've always thought influence is stronger than persuasion. So I did a very similar, different route as always, but I started breaking down what is happening here, because the sale is just taking a credit card. Everybody should be able to take the numbers down, right? But what is the efforts? And is there examples of these things outside? Then my thought process was, when I start making some money, it's much easier to pay commissions than it is savings. And then I'll also know what holes are in my game so I can get specialized training on each individual area.
Yeah, I think what's super interesting to me, and I hadn't made this connection until now, is that what was interesting is then as I started maybe researching some salespeople and I had been in sales, I had realized like up until that point, I had gotten zero ads or emails or anything like that on like, hey, invest in sales training. Like they weren't targeting me as a salesperson, even though I had been in sales for, you know, like 5, 6 years, right? I've only seen one person do that. Like the ads go out and target actual salespeople, but everyone else, like you have like Dan Locke, for example, like they're targeting people that are outside of the sales industry and saying, I'll train you to get you into the sales industry, which is interesting, right? But I had not gotten any ads besides from one person, for sales training, right? And it made more sense because it's like, I'm in sales. It makes sense that I need to work on developing my sales training. And I'm sure people probably think to themselves like, Hunter, you were doing, 15 grand a month or whatever. Like imagine if you had invested in sales training earlier. Totally, right? But I think for me is my life was set up really nice. I was working 15 hours a week and I was making 15 grand, a month. I was like, I don't really need anything else. I have time to go do school and do all these other things, spend more time with my wife, like all this stuff, right? I wasn't worried about like, and I was getting the results that I wanted. Like what I didn't want to grow, beyond that anyways. So, but I thought that was interesting. I didn't make that connection until now. I was like, I wasn't getting ads for sales training of like trying to get me into the industry, but these people that people know, like that's what got them in. And that's why there's this big focus because they believe the idea of marketing. These people are great at sales. They believe the idea of marketing. But at least that person is actually felt like targeted sales reps, to get better at their skills. There was only one that is like, hey, you're currently working in sales. What if we make you better? Right. Crazy.
Yeah. I think it's just an easier target to target the make money online crowd because, if you're in sales for a while, you start hearing some similar stuff. You might get introduced to different concepts and you have your own experience to draw from. When you're coming from an outside, I think it's easier to kind of oversell and overpromise and I've talked to people that joined high ticket closing and they had no idea it was a sales industry. And like that stuff blows my mind. They're like, oh no, I'm not in sales. I'm in high ticket closing, which was, like you said, a Dan Lok. They took high ticket as basically prices higher, right? And closing was an old real estate term, threw it together, trademarked it. And a lot of people have followed in his footsteps of trademarking. It's remote sales, whatever you want to call it. You can call it, your academies, you can call it inbound closing, you can call it whatever you want. It's remote and it's sales. That's the industry. And it's been around a long time before these trainers came in, and it will be around for a long time after. So I know we're running long, and I could talk to you for 8 hours.
Go all day.
But let's just, I guess, by wrapping up is kind of giving people an area to focus on, or maybe a checklist or something along those lines of, if they haven't found success in this industry so far, what areas, kind of broad areas or checklist items do you think they should be focused on to achieve the level of success that they wanted in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would evaluate first on, are you clear on what your goal is? What is it that you want? What is it that you desire? Not what someone else told you want, right? Like, what is it that you actually want? Because I know a lot of people figure that out, right? Like for me, right, sales, the reason why I liked it is that I get paid for my work and not my time. And so that meant I can make something like 15 grand a month and still have lots of hours, to do other things that I wanted to do and accomplish, right? So, like, what does it look like for you? Because everyone's situation is different, right? Some people, right, I think it's great. It's like, hey, if I just worked, 4 to 6 hours a day and I was making 8 grand a month, that would change my life. And you should buy into that, right? I don't think you need to buy into like, oh, $20,000, $30,000. I'm driving the sports car. I have the nice watch, right? I wear, designer, clothes. Like if that's what you want, great. Like make sure that you are bought into that. Not that it looks at that. I know not this one. I try to dress up nice for this, but I buy white t-shirts and black t-shirts, because choosing what to put on is I don't really care about. And I'll buy Fruit of Loom ones because it just doesn't really matter to me. I don't really care about clothes, right? And so I think getting really clear on your goal, and I'll give basically three steps, 3 areas. So getting really on clear, what is the vision? What is it that you actually want? What do you want? And some people, I call it, they need to go up to the mountain. They need to take time by themselves and really think about it. Close yourself in a closet, go on a walk, whatever that is for you, really find what do you want? What do you want? Your financial situation, your work situation, your life situation, and it's all a part of your life, right? I think it's interesting that people think work and life are separate for some reason. You need to balance those. Work is within life. That's just a part of it. Next thing I'd look for is, now that you understand and identified what you want, have you identified the right people to get you what you want and to help you get there? And that's where you can kind of start thinking and getting into some networking ideas, right? Have you identified the right people? Maybe up until this point, you've had your goal in mind, but you haven't found the right people, whether you've invested into the wrong coaching or training, whether you have been talking with the wrong people for the right opportunities, whether you've taken the advice from people around you. Have you identified the right people that can help you get what you want? An easy indicator of that is like, have they done what I'm trying to do, right? Or have they helped other people do what they want to do? And you can even multiply that out. But basically, have they done what I want to do? And I think the last thing I think that's important area of risk to focus on as well, I think those two are huge, is I think lastly, you got to just start connecting with those people. And so if you did those 3 things and focused on those things, you would get really far on wherever you wanted to go if you just followed this process of figuring out what your goal is, identifying the right people, and then connecting with those people, engaging with them.
So simple, so huge, because I think so many people look at what's available, right? It's like not realizing that everything's available to you when you have the relationships, and the idea that only the only people hiring our job post is absolutely insane, right? Like everybody's hiring all the time. If I wasn't hiring, and maybe look at Sam, right? Like I was not hiring when Sam reached out. I'll figure it out, because when someone sees your vision and they're bought in and they have the characteristics and beliefs and skills that you talked about, I'll make the position, right? And so I don't know any companies that would turn down a top performer or someone who can add value to the organization because, oh, we're not hiring right now. So simple, right? The desired outcome, the people that have either achieved what you want or have what you want, and then making the connection. That's it, man. I love it. I appreciate you so much. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's an honor and a privilege. I'm thankful every day for you, and I know our students couldn't do it without you. So thanks for taking the time, and hopefully we can make this a regular thing. If you have any questions for Hunter, he's been traveling a little bit, maybe some travel questions, maybe if it's not, the clothes, what does he value? Any questions around networking, put them in the comment section. We'll go through and answer them. But appreciate you as always, man. Take care.
Thank you.